You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Golseth.
We are continuing the first 100 years of church music history in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod with Benjamin Kolodziej today. Thanks to Concordia University, Wisconsin for supporting The Coffee Hour. Find out more about Concordia University, Wisconsin at cuw.edu.
Live uncommon.
All right, Benjamin, welcome back for another episode in this really fun series. I'm having a lot of fun learning this history. I hope you're having fun, too, sharing this history.
Always having fun talking about this with you.
Yes.
So we have been digging into the first 100 years of church music history in the LCMS. Mm-hmm. We've made it up to, where are we now in history?
We're
somewhere around the 20th century. Turn of the century.
Turn of the century, yes.
Early 1900s.
So
around the English transition.
Yes, which means then we're starting to move into the Lutheran Hymnal. That era as well. All right, who are some of the key figures in church music history in this age and moving up to, the 1950s? So we've got, early 1900s up to the 1950s.
Right, so this is actually, it gets surprisingly more complicated to talk about this time period.
Really?
It for one thing, there's more information.
Oh, yeah.
And there's more conflicting information.
Oh.
And there's more controversy. Oh. And this is certainly borne out in the records. I was dry this morning. I was going through the records of TLH compiled by Professor Pulak. And there's a lot of arguments in which hymns to include in this hymnal. Now, essentially the first English language hymnal for the LCMS was 1912. There are antecedents to that in the late 19th century, certainly, but 1912 would be the first real official English language hymnal. But remember, most LCMS Lutherans were not English speaking, so this was what became like the English district that were publishing this, because there was finally a realization that there were some English speaking Lutherans out there that needed a hymnal of their own. And interestingly, we talked about Walter's hymnal only having the text.
Yeah.
Most of the hymnals of the 19th century, no matter what denomination you're talking about, only had text.
Yeah.
This one of 1912, the Evangelical Lutheran hymn, had the music with it, which now TLH will have the music with it. And so I say it's difficult to talk about because there's just so much to sift through. So I was looking through, there's probably like 4 big boxes at CHI just with some correspondence on when they're creating the hymnal in 1941. And you also deal with people who families are still around, and people are very, they hold on to their opinions for a while. So this it was important to have TLH published with the music finally, although you have Hymns Ancient and Modern published in England in the 19th century, which is really the first hymnal of any wide distribution to have the music published with it. So why the Lutherans didn't get on board earlier, you can argue about that. I mean, I know why they didn't. It was much easier to have a small hymnal that you could carry around without the music. But there was precedence. But in the Lutheran Church, it took a long time to get to the music with the text.
Mm-hmm. Hymns Ancient and Modern is a great hymnal. We talk about that a lot on the Lutheran Ladies Lounge. It comes up probably every hymn sing episode because everything comes through that hymnal. Every English hymn that we know about basically comes through that hymnal. It's great. That's for another episode, though. So we're talking about 1940s-ish, or getting up to the 1940s-ish. What were some of the main things? Obviously, the creation of TLH. When did that actually start becoming something that they were planning? Because obviously it was published in 1941, but how much of it? In the 20s. Okay. So what was that? That's a long process.
Well, just any hymnal is a long process.
That's true.
That just is the case.
Yeah. What was that? Who were the people that were influential in some of that process?
Well, let's actually go back. I want to go back.
Okay.
And this actually takes us back to 1895. I know we shouldn't do that. It violates our uniform principle. But I want to talk about Friedrich Lochner.
Oh, okay.
You know Friedrich Lochner?
Yeah.
He had a son, Martin Lochner, who taught at Concordia River Forest. But Friedrich Lochner wrote in 1895 a book called Der Hauptgottesdienst, the Chief Divine Service. And in it, he proposed how to sing the service, how it should be chanted, how the pastor should chant, how the people should respond. He wasn't dealing so much with hymnody. He did that elsewhere. But the Hauptgottesdienst was really important. And this was, in 1895, this was coming about at the same time that the common service was also being developed, or had been developed, so that was 1888. But Lochner comes up with this. So, like we sing, "The Lord be with you and with thy spirit." These are Lochner's tones, which he appropriates historically. They're not his that he composes, but he collects them. They are not what Walter uses.
Oh.
So Lochner is setting another strand of liturgical practice, which kind of informs TLH.
Okay.
In TLH, if you open your TLH, you know that the pastor says something, "The Lord be with you," and the congregation responds by singing.
Yeah.
Or that's not the case in LSB, right? Because you have,
Right.
but it was meant, TLH, those responses were meant to be sung. It just didn't quite make it into the book, so there was confusion once it got out to the parish. Yeah. There was a book published, the music for the liturgy, I think it was called, and it had all of that in it. And it goes back to Lochner and Lochner's scholarship. It's that strand of scholarship that sets itself apart from what Walter was doing in his liturgy. So I just want to give Friedrich Lochner credit where he's due. And another thing, I was in his archives this morning, and Friedrich Lochner wrote the most beautiful, drew these lovely little pictures. He was trained as an artist in Germany, and he there's pictures of horses and cats, and it got me thinking how smart these people were.
Yeah.
That's not to take anything away from modern people, but Friedrich Lochner was so creative, not only in his theologizing and his creating of liturgy, but in his works of visual art. There's paintings in there. There's all manner of wonderful creations. And it just got me thinking how these people, all the people that we've talked about up till now, have just been so creative. And one of the reasons I've engaged in this research is because there's still plenty of creative people out there doing their thing today. And I hope that studying these people encourages them. I hope I'm one of them, encourages me and you to be creative about our approach, not only with our music, but our theologizing, to think critically, but based on the past, a knowledge of Scripture, knowledge of gospel, knowledge of the confessions, knowledge of the hymns that came before, how people sing. We don't exercise freedom just with no discipline. We do it with the knowledge of what happened before, and then to expand that.
All right, Lochner. Who else would we like to look at or learn about in our time together today?
Toward the end of this time, there's a fellow. His name is Edward Rechlin, Rechlin, and he's a major concert organist in the LCMS. So he dies in 1961. So he's a bit outside of our bounds. Most of his career is done by 1950, so I can include him. And he was actually the first musician, organist, who trained not only outside of the LCMS, but outside of America.
Wow.
He studied with Alexandre Guillemot and Charles-Marie Widor in Paris.
Whoa.
Who were, if you know your organ music, those are very important composers of the 19th century. And he studied with, this is very unusual, because generally in the 19th century, you went to Lutheran grade school and Lutheran seminary or the Addison, something like that, and then taught in a Lutheran school, and you never saw anything but Lutheranism. And he dared to go outside of Lutheranism for his training. And he was quite successful. He concertized all over the United States, mostly in Lutheran churches, but his goal was to bring back the music of not only Bach, but the other composers who wrote on the Lutheran chorale. So he was really focused on music of the Lutheran chorale. Not, if you know the music of Bach, he wrote preludes and fugues and Passacaglia and all sort of wonderful things. But Reckling wasn't so much interested in that. He was interested in the chorales because he was interested in communicating those texts. He realized the import that those texts conveyed, the gospel. He was a bit of a difficult guy. He made a lot of enemies, because he had a very strong personality, like many musicians do. It was just easy for that to happen. But in so doing, he really saw himself as an evangelist of the gospel through music. And he did that through music based on chorales. So these chorales that were so important to Walter in 1847 that he had to compile this hymnal and distribute it to the Synod, they're still important in the first half of the 20th century when Reckling has gone to Europe. He's tasted he talks about his apartment in Paris and discovering all these things. And he said, this is so beyond what I've experienced as a Lutheran. I've experienced farms and a little bit of St. Louis, but nothing like Paris. That was so new to him. But yet, when he came back, he was grounded on the chorales. He'd experienced the world, but he still realized that these chorales and the texts that they contain are the gospel. And so he set out to be a musical evangelist. He was only semi-successful. And I say that because it's really hard to find. I have not found any recordings of him. He had different phases. He taught, and he kind of burned himself out toward the end. But he really did accomplish a lot of things, and all centered around hymns. So we're talking today about church music, education, and it kind of all is based on how your congregation sings on a Sunday morning, doing that as best you can.
We are learning about the first 100 years of church music history in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod with Benjamin Kolodziej. We will continue the conversation in just a moment. You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
At Concordia University, Wisconsin, we believe you were created for a reason: to use your God-given gifts to help others, to live a life of self-sacrifice in a me-first world, to live a life that's uncommon. Whether you're taking one of 50-plus online programs or learning with us in person on the shores of Lake Michigan, you'll be equipped to make an uncommon impact. Learn more at cuw.edu. Concordia University, Wisconsin. Live uncommon.
Welcome back to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
We are taking a look at the first 100 years of church music history with Benjamin Kolodziej. He's church organist and musicologist and friend here at the Coffee Hour because he is spending time with us. He's dedicated lots of time to help us learn this important and interesting church history from the church music perspective. All right, so we left off with,
Reckling.
Thank you, Reckling, who went to France, went to Paris.
Studied with Vidor, of all people.
And came back and had an impact on church music in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. You said you haven't found any recordings of him, of his music.
Well, I should say I found one recording. It was essentially a silent movie for which he wrote background music.
Huh.
And so I found that music. I'm not exactly sure how that is applied, whether that was sent out in silent movie fashion to another organist to play, or whether he ultimately recorded it somehow when that process. So I don't know. That actually brings up, he was very creative. How can you spread the gospel through music? And he was pretty good at that. With this silent movie and a company about Luther's Reformation. So that's the only music I found of his, sadly.
All right, so we're in the final part of the 100 years that you're studying. Who are some of the other people or events that you've found so far that are interesting and relevant?
So maybe this is a good way to conclude, because this is kind of where we started.
Okay.
And I would say I had mentioned this project of mine started with Connie Seddon, whose father was Walter Buzine.
Yeah.
And Walter Buzine was a Lutheran musicologist, musician. He actually went and studied at Union Theological Seminary in New York City, so his training was initially in the LCMS, then outside of it, and then he returned. And we owe to him this increasing importance of knowing musicology. So musicology is basically a scientific study of music. So it's the composers, the authors, how they relate together, the application of church music to any particular situation. And Walter Buzine was basically the first musicologist we had. Now, we talked about these people from Addison. They would write all the time. They wrote all the time, the Schoblatt, but it was practical. It was all practical. The organists do this. You appreciate Bach more. Here's maybe a bit about Bach's life. They were good about that. But in terms of studying music and how to apply it, Walter Buzine was really the first one. He's out of the scope of my context because his career is quite much of it happens after 1950. But he brings to us an appreciation for where our music comes from. It's not just music that we say our choir sings on Sunday morning and it's a lovely anthem. Well, that's nice, but what do we know about the composer? What can the composer's context, historical and musical, inform us about how we perform the piece? And that's not just for no reason. The point is so that music can come alive and spread the gospel. So it's a scientific approach in the service of the gospel. And so Walter Buzine really should be given more credit in the LCMS than he often gets. There is a book, a biography written of him by Kirby Coriath, which covers him very well. And his daughter, Connie Seddon, has a number of she wrote for the Concordia Historical Institute about his life. So he's well covered, but yet I'm afraid we don't give him as much credit as an example. And this may be a little bit abstract, but in early years, say in English, we're talking about English. So 1930s, 40s, in church bulletins, you would see the Bach chorales or any German chorales in English, translated in English. Mm-hmm. You'd never see them in their original language. But Walter Buzine's his effect on us, he compelled us to think, well, we need to go back to the original language because that kind of makes more sense, then translate it from there. So put in the original text with the translation, because the original text is important from a understanding point of view. And you see that elsewhere too. This kind of happens outside even of Lutheran circles. Before the 1940s, 50s, you'll see all the choral preludes in English, and then you begin to see them in German with a translation. So that's musicology in action.
That's so cool.
Any other key figures that you want us to recognize or acknowledge in the remaining 6 minutes that we have?
Well, this is an ongoing study.
Yes.
So I have a number of people that I am looking forward to exploring. And I should say that Concordia Historical Institute has been very helpful, and we should avail ourselves of what they offer. I've been down there this week, and they just have so much. The archives for the LCMS, there's just a lot of riches down there. So I just encourage people to go see what they're very friendly. They don't bite. It's a lot of fun to go down there. I'm discovering things about my people that I'm researching. I didn't know this about Lochner and his wonderful paintings, and he had sons. One was Louis Lochner, who was a World War II journalist and photographer, and for the AP. And there's his pictures that he took of kings and queens in there. And it's so easy to get distracted. I have to remind myself, okay, focus. But these sort of things that give us an entire picture of who these people are. I think that's what I'm trying to do. You started asking me about the framework of this, and it's the people. You get at the theology, you get at the practice, you get at all this other stuff through their lives and their families and their approach and their background. And you do that by all this ancillary material, sorting through this. It gives you a picture of who they are. So I would just like to give credit where credit's due, that CHI is a wonderful resource for the LCMS.
Yeah, and they have a whole reading study area. You can just sit and nerd out to your heart's desire, which is just wonderful. So yes, yes, absolutely. So in our final few minutes together, what are you looking forward to? Because you're kind of in the midst of this now. What are you looking forward to? What's kind of next on your research horizon? Who are you? Some of the people you're digging into, some more of the things that you want to study that you haven't quite gotten to yet.
There's two people, Hasse and Stelzer from Concordia Seward.
Okay.
I have not done them yet. Hasse actually was the first to write individual chorale preludes on all the hymns in TLH.
Oh.
And actually, they're over at Washington University. I need to figure out how to get into that library because I want to see them maybe later today. I don't know. So we'll figure out if I can get in there and look. So I haven't done anything on Concordia Seward. They were later, of course, because River Forest started with Addison. They were really the first teachers' college. Not really. They came from other things, but Seward was later, so there's not as much history there. But those two people are very important, and I need to still research them.
Okay.
So we didn't invent the teacher, the Lutheran teacher. We just trained them. Got it.
Indeed.
Well, this has just been fantastic history for us to learn. Thank you so much for being willing to share it with us. And I know that you'll be documenting all that you're learning and researching, and we'll be sharing it in some format and some medium in the future. But we appreciate that you have just been willing to share all this history and this knowledge with us as well. And we might have had a little fun along the way.
We definitely did. Thanks for listening to me. It's great to have a platform.
It's been fascinating. Our guest for this series is Benjamin Kolodziej. He's a church organist and musicologist. Great friend. Thanks so much for spending time with us on the Coffee Hour.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support the Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit KFUO.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@KFUO.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.